So, good afternoon, Aristo.
Good morning, Ron. It's 7:17. You wanted to start this at 5:55, but of course, it came later. But the thing is, I'd like to talk about numerology today. And I'd like to talk about it in a
555 and 666 and
666 and 777 and all that stuff. But I'm not going to get into it in the sense of, well, this is this and that is that, and you have to. I want to get into another question. When people look at any kind of information, they usually take it for granted as long as the information is credited. If somebody is an authority or comes off as, well, I know what I'm talking about, and that's natural. People will say, well, yes, that's good enough. Why? Because I don't want to research it. If you give me references or whatever and this and that, I might be able to, but sometimes those are enough. The fact that I can see references in any given document or whatever means that you know what you're talking about, because people want the gist of it. But these days, however, we live in an age where there is complexity, confusion, disinformation, misinformation, misunderstanding, and the truth is weaved into all of that. We don't even have the luxury of saying, okay, all this is a lie, so let's just throw it out and forget about it and be done with it and then just go for the truth. No, the truth is like a bunch of rice kernels thrown in a bunch of coffee beans and then covered with a bunch of brown paint. So you got to go feel your way through to find each little rice kernel within the coffee beans. Ron, are you there?
I'm
or
here.
Did this somehow stop?
No.
Anyways, it says it's recording, so I'm going to continue.
Yeah, you froze up.
Ron's picture froze. Anyways, it's like you have all of these. You're feeling your way through. You do not have the luxury of just saying, well, bring me a big sifter and, whatever, get the coffee beans out or get the rice things out so we can make it easy. It does not work that way. We have to get into the fray. And within all of this, there's also a bunch of bugs that bite us that look like coffee beans and rice kernels. So, if you can imagine all this, you're sifting through to find the truth. And the thing is, when you find one little rice kernel of truth, you're overjoyed because you've been bitten by these bugs and you've been dirtied up by the paint and I don't know what, and you're tired and you're frustrated. So you take that little bean and you go, yes, I have the truth. This is it. Now we can have a feast of rice truth. But you can't. You need a whole bunch of rice in order to make even one bowl, let alone a feast. So we do have our work cut out for us, and that is something very hard because it seems like the whole of reality is working against this. Because for us it would be easy in this analogy to say, okay, you have to feel your way through. This is a rice kernel. And you wash it, and then you see it's a little white rice kernel. But that is discernment, and our natural discernment is not functioning properly as things stand. It's been sabotaged. We know this. And we also know that in order to cure a situation, in order to remedy a situation, you have to know what the disease is. You have to know what the affliction is. You have to understand the affliction. You have to understand how the affliction operates and what it does to you. And then you have to look around and see what resources are available to deal with the affliction. All of these things are a learning process. This is the mental side of the situation. It's the side where the mind can actually help us instead of hinder us. But the resources themselves are the intuition, they're the feeling nature, they're the sensate nature, it's our very body, all of these things. So when we're given occult information, we tend to forget that and just grab it because we can't afford it. It's the same thing with science. Who's going to go out and learn the principles of physics as opposed to somebody just saying, look, this is the way it is, do it. And the establishment is really taking us for a ride. Oh, look, global warming, raise your taxes. Oh, look, chemtrails don't exist. Just inhale deeply and go for your vaccines. The authorities say so. We've been taken for a ride, and luckily, fortunately, we don't need to know all of this advanced science to get by. However, if you're dealing with something, with anything, if you're dealing with the issue of vaccine, if you're an activist, if you're dealing with genetic modified stuff, you need to do some research. It is necessary to be in the know. Being ignorant in that sense is not an option. The same thing applies to occultism. The problem with occultism is because, well, even if you're not an occultist, there's a shitload of information that Christian type fundamentalist types are spouting out about occultism. This is bullshit. Oh, this is a demon. Something comes up like a spiritual psychic ability, and then, oh, that's demonic. That's witchery. That's this. So this is the devil's work. And basically, that's just the program that says shut down, shut up. But even worse than that, you go deeper, there's a whole bunch of opportunists that want to manipulate people. So you go and try to understand these things and maybe apply them, and you can be taken for a ride. Oh, join my coven, join my special group, do this, pay this amount of money. If you don't pay the amount of money, just do my teachings. Believe in me. There's such a thing as psychological vampirism. If you believe in somebody, they can actually drain energy from you. They can actually begin manipulating you, even if they don't gain something material from it. There's a whole bunch of things. So, and even more than that, we are in a position. I was looking at Alex Jones. They talked about the Snowden situation, and now it's come up that, well, this guy, and one person who's usually reliable, anybody could be a double agent or whatever, just said, well, he's a double agent. He's bitching about this in order to establish himself as a formal whistleblower. He's going to weasel his way back into the United States and then become the proponent of anti-spying. And then he's going to get people, to believe in him and all of this. And then he's going to turn it around. All of a sudden, he's going to betray everybody, and poof, the spying is in, and people have made all the wrong decisions, and he's kept people from organizing in the right way. And then, so you have half the people saying he is, and half the people saying he isn't. And even that, if you really wanted to screw people up, you didn't even have to just convince them that this guy's a double agent or whatever. You just sow the seed of doubt, and that's it. So the thing that occultism does for us, aside from the fact that I mentioned this example, because there's a lot of people out there trying to take us for a ride. And they do this in the New Age community. They have a lot of leeway because the New Age community deals with issues that are controversial and difficult to research. Aside from all the geopolitical issues that go outside of the box, stuff you won't see on the mainstream, you see a bunch of, disinformation there. And then you have disinformation about all of the esoteric potentials. Now, the establishment has done their own research and exploration in esoteric potential. They've researched psychic abilities. Half their mind control stuff comes from research in psychic abilities. They apply occult principles in their brainwashing methods. They apply occult principles in their mind control stuff. Collectively, the hypnotic stuff is meshed with occult principles as well. So they don't want us to get into this properly. They also don't want our minds to be liberated in any shape or form. So there's a whole conspiracy theory even around the fact that the musical scale is 440 hertz, because that shuts you down. It divorces the body from the mind. Now, they say that Joseph Goebbels came up with this. He didn't. This was back in the 1800s. The guy who came up with this was a very conservative person who probably had issues with body sensuality and all of that. He was a musician and he wanted to sell musical instruments, so he pushed this, and all of the wealthy people bought into it really fast. They funded him a lot, so all of the instruments were changed. So that says something. Now, why did these people are conservatives, they don't change standards so easily. They must have found something. And Goebbels basically formalized it. He said, look, we noticed that propaganda, when we have that marching music at 440 hertz, people really believe what we say. If we have it at 423 hertz, they don't. Why? Because the scale of 423 hertz resonates with the body, the heart, the chakras, all of that. It's a natural resonant frequency scale. And so When you're tuned into your sense of feeling, you cannot be snowed. You cannot be fooled. It's very difficult. You can be, but it's much more difficult because the body does not project itself in. It doesn't project itself in the future. It's not worried about the past. It lives in the present moment. So it's much more objective, literally, than the mind is. The mind is subjective in the sense that it's relativist, in the sense that it can be fooled. It's a virtual creator, a creator of virtual reality. But the body is right there. It's our anchor. And what the body says, if you're in pain, you better listen to it. If you feel pleasure, you might as well enjoy it. But if the pleasure and pain is in the mind, it can easily be something unhealthy going on that poses itself as pain or pleasure. The Illuminati theory just says, no, it's all the mind. Of course it says that. The only way to play God is to divorce everything and isolate the mind and manipulate that. They just want to stick us in the big computer, so they say. In my opinion, they don't want to do that for themselves, but they want to convince everybody, jump in the big computer, and then we can do with your reality what we want. Why? Because they have not succeeded where the mystics and the mages and all of that wanted to go in ancient times. Now, this was a grand introduction, so let me get into what this has to do with numerology. The reason I was saying all of this is, well, I mentioned the reason, but basically, as far as occultism is concerned, nobody asks why. When somebody gives you information, they say, well, this is how you do it, this is what it is, this is where it goes, but they don't tell you, why is it this way? If you really want to cover all your bases, even as it's inconvenient, you need to ask why. And your body can help you there because your body gives you those gut feelings that process information, shall we say, in a way that the mind, the brain, the cortex does not. And the heart the same way, in a different manner. You need to have all of your centers open. This is why everything I've read about Kundalini Yoga is distorted, it's partial. I had to piece a lot of things together, but when you explain it naturally, it is very natural. It's not dangerous. It's simply feeling your body in a progressive manner to awaken it. But you have to be involved. Many people do this in a mechanical manner and end up screwing themselves. The body is not a machine. It's a living being, and it's you. You cannot divorce it. And I'm not for the idea that we are, spirits that come in and ride a body or mount it or have it as a vehicle. This body is a precipitation of our spiritual nature, of our esoteric nature. So, numerology, I don't want to emphasize it so much in terms of technique, but I want to emphasize the issue of anything that's given to you and told you. Please ask why and explore it until you realize the sense behind it. And not the rumors, not just all of the stories and the negative or the positive stories. So let me give this example with numerology. First of all, we need to see where we're making assumptions. When you take a number like 666 and you say this number represents evil, how can creation exist when one of its numbers represent evil? The continuity from 1 to 9 is disrupted if you take a number and you say, well, this is an evil number, or from 1 to 999. And then if the number out of its nature, then you have to get the number out. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. And that doesn't work. Now, the thing is, again, numbers are considered universal. Now, thus, their occult interpretations are considered universal. Such is not the case. In ancient times, including Pythagoras, who was considered the Western father of number theory and all of that, made mathematics and occult numerology, and some say even that the Hebrews originally didn't have numbers to their letters, that the Greeks put the numbers and then the Phoenicians and Hebrews adopted it afterwards. But I don't know. The thing is that letters and numbers were indistinguishable in ancient times. The letter A or Alpha or Aleph represented the number 1. The letter B, Beta, whatever, represented the number 2. So if you wanted to write number 1, you wrote A. If you wanted to write number 2, you wrote B. There was no distinction. Thus, the meanings, it's just that you had what you call isopsophy. You could perform mathematics with letters when you put a little mark on them and said, oh, these are numbers. And thus, the logical outcome of this was that, well, if we can add our letters together and create new letters, you know, add numbers to create new numbers, then the corresponding letters are equivalent to the previous ones, to the previous sum. A plus B, 1 plus 2 equals 3. So A plus B equals C. So when you take A and B together, the meaning of A and B equals C. Okay. The point is that each letter has meaning. There is a theory that says that back in the age of Taurus, 2,500 years ago, now 4,500 years ago, it's 2,500 BC, the vernal equinox was in the sign of Taurus, at the head of the bull. If you look at the stars of the head of the bull and add them together, they form a letter A, an ancient Phoenician letter A. So that is the letter Aleph, and the letter Aleph means bull. It means ox. L, the word L has an A and an L. The L is the ox goad. It's basically the whip that forces the ox. So the name of God, or the identifier, is this bull, and the stars, the stellar resonance that presented, the thing that pulls the plow, but also the plow and the earth and the person behind the plow. And then the L is the motive force that pushes the ox forward. So all of this construct is the nature, the abbreviation of a divine name, so to speak. It's the motive force of reality. It's the creator in the sense of not out of nothing, but you have a field and you're plowing the field and you're planting seeds and you're making things grow. So all of these things come into effect. The thing is that numerology relates to the Phoenician and Hebrew and Canaanite alphabets, the alphabets of the Eastern Mediterranean. The way it relates to Greek is slightly different because there have been letter modifications. Triple numbers have special significance. Why? Because the alphabet is based on a 27-letter scheme. It's based on from 1 to 9, and then you have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and then the third row is 100, 200, 300, etc. The Hebrew alphabet stops at 400, basically at the 22nd letter, but it came from a larger alphabet, it got contracted, there's been modifications. However, that's how the numerology works. It works the same with the Greek alphabet. Pythagoras worked with the same numerology. So, the first 9 numbers are defined by the first letter. The second 9 numbers are defined by the 10th letter. Etc., etc. So the first 9 numbers, a little bit of paying attention here because there's a lot of information, represent Aleph. They are extensions. 1, and then you have, everything comes out of 1, the single digits. So they represent an evolutionary flow between 1 in 9 steps. And the 9 steps are there because we have 10 fingers. So we say our 10 fingers are like an octave, and we have the spectrum going up like 1 to 7, and then poof, the 8 goes the other way. 0 is included for that reason because everything comes out of potential. It's included when you go beyond 9, you go to 10, 11, 12. If you don't include 0, then 10 to 19 is 10 numbers, but 1 to 9 is only 9 numbers. Single digits have 1 less. So if you include 0, it's not a number really as a quantity, but it's the basis of all numbers because all numbers come from somewhere. They don't come from nothing. 0 does not mean nothing. It means potential. It means the void. It means where everything that is manifest comes from. So the number 10 then includes the void within it. It's not the void alone. The first numbers from 1 to 9, they're what's extracted from the void. But once you go to 10, you actually carry a little void with you, and you're extracting a whole bunch of a much larger thing. And then when you go to the hundreds, you have a double void. You have a 1 and a 0 and a 0. And you're extracting a much larger train of numbers. From 100 to 1,000, you have more numbers in between than you do from 1 to 9. So The first row represents a fundamental principle. The fundamental principle of 1, of 2, of 3, etc. The second row represents the first manifestation out of potential when you have those fundamental principles in place. So these are manifest principles. These are principles we can see and understand. The third row of hundreds represents universal principles. Essentially, if 1 represents the principle of existence and 2 represents the manifest effect of the principle of existence, which is work, action, doing something, then the third one represents the universal systemic interaction of all the manifest things forming a big system of manifest activity known as an evolutionary complex. It's symbolized by the rising sun, by the back of the head, by the subconscious, by the animal nature, because the animal and plant natures are the evolutionary field in which we exist. So you got a lot of complexity here. It's not easy to understand. It's much simpler to say, well, 1 is this, 2 is just that, 3 is just that. And thus we come to this notion of, well, and for this reason, when you include a whole bunch of Christian myths and I don't know what else, you come to certain conclusions that may be discontinuous with your original premises. And that's what we need to look. And this is why I'm expressing this, because when you say 555, you are actually forming a word that's based on the letter from the ones, the letter from the tens, the corresponding letter from the hundreds. If you can put all of your letters in a row, and then the second row and the third row, you form a letter grid. And the columns of this letter grid form triple numbers. The fifth column will form 500, the 5 and then 50 and 500, and that's 555. The sixth column will form 666. The seventh column will form 777, etc. So what a column means, what a triple number means, is the integration of fundamental principles, manifest effects, and systemic universal outcomes. You have all of this condensed into a triple number. And that's why triple numbers are very important. They're not about just you and me. They're about the full holographic thing, from the basic principle expanded into the universal effect of, how everything, all of the relationships of everything affected by this principle. Thus, when you look at the Hebrew letters, however, the fundamental ones, they also define the rest. The number 50 is basically the number 5 expanded into manifestation. The number 500 is the number 5 and 50 expanded into a universal dynamic. So it may seem that they have different interpretations and they're different letters, but in essence, it's the same principle applied to a greater degree. That simplifies things. So if you can understand the number 5, 6, and 7, since we're dealing with the number 6, the 666, we need to understand not just the 555, but also the 777. And why? You see 777 in Illuminati occultism a lot. So if they stop you at 666, if they force the beast onto 666, and then they all jump off into 777 in their rituals, that says something. Why are they doing this? Why are they keeping us into a demonized 666? So there are two options here. What the ambassador said about going back to 555 may not be wrong. I am not saying that it's false, but I'm trying to interpret it in the sense that if you want to fix something, you have to sometimes take a step back. It's not the solution of where we want to be, but if you want to fix 666, it may be afflicting. That's different. It may be traumatized. The principle may be dysfunctional. So if you want to look at a dysfunctional, fundamental, manifest, and universal principle, you need to take a step back to the previous principle, the principle that led up to it, because you need to stand on firm ground. If the ground upon which you're standing is shaky, then you can take a step back or a step forward. But if you take a step forward, you may lose continuity. So you take a step back and understand what 555 is all about, and you make sure you're not isolated, because ultimately you might have to go back to 111 and start from there. That's what mystics do. They go into the fundamentals of what is existence and experience that, and then they move from there, and they take a long time doing so and applying it along the way. Magical abilities That's why wise people say that if you understand these principles, you're very empowered to manipulate or interact with creation in a way that other people cannot who don't understand these. Because understanding isn't just an intellectual or an emotional thing, it's a full embodiment of your nature and recognizes something in your nature. So the first letter is existence, the second letter is containment. In the Hebrew alphabet is represented by a house, the family, everything that's nurtured and contained. The third letter is purposeful motion. It's purposeful vibration. The fourth letter is reverberation. It's the relationship or response from purposeful vibration. It's represented by the vagina or the doorway. It's the sexual vibration that comes through a masculine stimulus. And usually it's presented as grounding, but this is what grounding is. Grounding is the doorway into the feminine. So once you have this reverberation effect, because it's not enough to just vibrate. I'm vibrating love. That's what the New Agers do. That doesn't do nothing. It just, you need to experience the return. If you experience the return of anything you vibrate, then you know that, it's like radar or sonar. You're experiencing the return. You're actually perceiving the effects of your vibration. You're actually having a relationship with the context of your vibration, where it's going. So something is also vibrating at you. So unless you have mastered that, this is what Tantra is about. Unless sexual connection and all of that, unless you have mastered that and open to that and experienced it in a consistent manner, then you cannot move to the number 5. 5 is not a theoretical construct. 5 represents what happens when you have all of these reverberations going on. It's back and forth. It's life. When these things accumulate, and within the context of 4, you add another element of existence, that element of existence becomes an observer of the totality of the effect. As my mind is the observer of all of the interactions that go on in my body, for example, I'm alive. When I experience the relationships that go back and forth as a third party that's participating in those relationships, as a child of those relationships and as a parent of those relationships at the same time, I am alive in the fullness of that flow. When I experience that I am alive and feel that, then I am in the number 5. Occultists express these dynamics alchemically as the interactions of 5 elements. My 5 senses, what do they tell me? They tell me I'm alive. They put life into a certain context. So I interact with it through the reverberations of number 4. All of the senses reverberate number 4, but the outcome is number 5. So this is the fundamental principle, and it's represented. The original alphabet wasn't like hieroglyphs. They had images for each letter. So the image of a man raised with, or a person with their arms raised up to the sky, and sometimes they were even jumping for joy or kneeling down or in prayer, open up to the divine and feeling that ecstasy, represents the letter corresponding to the number 5 in the Hebrew and Phoenician alphabets. So it's joy. It's the joy of life, the joy of divine connection, the joy of prayers answered, the jumping for joy. The letter E basically is the modern version of that. But in essence, the number 5 is the accumulation of the senses, of the elements, of everything in a complex, interacting smorgasbord of interrelating dynamics that leads to the joy and the experience of life. It is also correlated with the life breath. You breathe in and you feel that energy, the prana, the chi, the all, whatever you want to call it. This is also related to the number 5. So it comes back to the part, before you want to go to the number 6, you need to experience the number 5. The principle and manifestation of the number 5 is living beings. When Jesus did the miracle with the fish, and when he talks about fishermen, the letter Nun, the letter N in Hebrew, is the mystical, what he was talking about, the mystical correspondence. Fish represent life forms. They represent people, they represent animals, they represent beings, they represent life forms. The waters represent the medium, the number 40, the letter M, is the waters. And that represents the medium in which the fish swim. A fisherman enters the medium and harvests the fish. A shepherd harvests the flock. All of these things represent the number 50. So when you're into the number 50, you are not just experiencing the principle of life, but you are experiencing the principle of life in all beings. You expand your principle of life into all beings and empathize with them as you understand that your nature and life experience is in continuity and more or less the same as their nature. Go to 500. What is 500? That's a very interesting number because it goes beyond the normal 22 letters. So, you know, if you look at an older alphabet or whatever, but you can correlate it with, it's a final K, and the K represents a container. So this kind of mixes things up. But in essence, to stick with the numbers, what is the universal principle of living beings? It is it's what we call the web of life. I mean, it comes naturally out. The web of life as a single entity, not as a series of interactions, but as a presence. If you can feel the living, self-aware web of life as a presence, and if you can interact with that presence, this is called, in Buddhism, it's called the third watch of the night in Buddha's experience of enlightenment. When the Buddha stood under the tree and was enlightened, basically, there were 3 night watches, and the 4th one was enlightenment. The first one was basically, he understood his immortality as a soul. The second one, he understood that every animal and being has a soul. The third one was the web of life, that they all interconnected to a single song of being that is a self-aware thing. If everything is a verb, then life is a verb, and life is a song, and that song is self-aware because there's feedback. Now, 555 is all that. So as you can understand, my interpretation is a bit more complex than the other stuff. It holds a bit more. And I'm not saying everybody should research this and do it. I did, you know, I wouldn't do that to people. But I'm saying think about this more, because the numbers themselves, with the few principles that I've expressed, you can extrapolate yourself. And 666 is not a demonic. You know why 666 is demonic? Because it represents reproduction. This is why it's been demonized. Look at the Matrix. Why has sexuality always been repressed? Why has sexuality always been demonized? Why has genetic reproduction been controlled? Because it is a crux of control. Because because it is also a place where we're vulnerable. When we reproduce, we enter into a dynamic where we transcend everything that makes us stable. We kind of destabilize. And this is not vulnerability in terms of being weak. It's basically the vulnerability that occurs through any transformation. You take anything and you change its form, then it's in the middle somewhere. It's not stable. It can go anyway. It can be stabilized. If something interferes with it, then something bad can happen. So it's only vulnerable if you're in a situation where you haven't addressed everything, where you're not completely in tune with what's going on, and you're not connected with it. If there's separation within the transition, it causes vulnerability. So the number 6, the symbol for the number 6 is the penis. It's the penis, the tent peg. It's called valve. In fact, this number was so problematic that when it turned into Greek, and then from Greek to Latin, our number W, our letter W, our letter V, our letter U, and our letter F all come from this letter. And we couldn't contain what this letter represents. And the Greeks removed the letter and just kept a false letter there, which they called stigma. The word stigmata. Stigma means a mark, and sometimes not a good mark. Stigma was just and they used it as a final S in the Middle Ages. But the psychology of the way alphabets evolve is very, very intriguing, you know, and it reveals a lot. But this number 6 has always been stigmatized. And so you have this and the stigmata are representations in religion of nails, you know, being pounded into hands and feet. The nail was the original symbol for the vav, or however they call it. Vowels come from this, are cognates to this word. Basically, the fundamental vibration that's been fucked with, literally, no pun intended. Because this is a kind of, the 10th peg represents, when you have a 10th peg, you stabilize the 10th. The house, number 2, is made stable. When you have a pivot on a hinge of a door, it's also that. The door can turn when it's based on that. It's the axis around which something can turn, because it provides a centralized stability for a wide degree of otherwise unstable motion. Thus, we learn what can happen if we stabilize the 6. Somebody doesn't want us to stabilize the 6. The 6 represents fertilizing interconnectedness. Once you have experienced the fundamental principle of life, you want to share it. Of course, when we get into the 50, we have whole systems and all that, but between 5 and 50, there's a whole bunch of numbers. So I'm just going to the next fundamental principle after the number 5, which is 6. And this fundamental principle is the principle of a relationship that results in fertilization, that results in reproduction. The number 6, when it's taken into manifestation, what does that do? Well, it forms an expanded version of the principle in terms of groups, in terms of a network of relationships. That's why the 666 is fundamentally with computers and information grids and things like that, because the palm leaf, the symbol for the palm leaf is basically a stick with a bunch of branches coming out. So the fractal branching network, which and the name of the letter is also related to the word for memory. So you have a computer-like concept, coming into this, but it basically represents, and this is also a symbol of protection. It represents the thorn bush that nomads used to use in order to mark their territory, so they kept the thorn bush so predators wouldn't come in and eat their flocks. So in this case, this kind of fertilizing network also keeps us stable. When our sexuality, and this isn't just sexuality physically, this is our creativity. This is our ability to share and contribute, not because we're obligated, but because we have something, our life. The previous letter, number 5, is, the natural outcome is to be shared and circulated. What is the number 6? The number 6 is not easy because it's the universal principle of that. Just as evolution is the universal principle of the arm that works of every action. When you have actions and actions in life, not just actions and vibrations, but I'm talking about the intention to act. At the universal frame, you're going to have evolution. Things are going to evolve and change. Existence is going to morph into other forms of itself. So when you have the number 5, the 50 becomes 500. A life form turns into the web of life. When you have the number 6, what does a network turn into? It turns into a super network, beyond a super network. You don't need to have linear connections. It's a holographic, self-fertilizing presence. It's an orgasmic presence where joy is a present moment constancy, not where ecstasy is a present moment constancy, where well-being is a present moment constancy. I mean, for us, we're compromised so much that pleasure is overwhelming. We tend to try to block it out. We numb ourselves to it. It scares us. The body itself is conditioned to essentially have a tolerance effect to pleasure, much more so than to pain. So, you even have damage if you have too much pleasure, or so the conditioning goes. But in this case, if the 6 is mastered, this doesn't happen. You see, in my opinion, in your relationship, the creation of worlds is the number 666. In essence, because you form a deep network, you master the principle of interfertilizing circulation as is going on. And then you take it further to expand it into a network of relationships. And then you take that further and realize the full universal presence behind that. And this is a felt dynamic. And once this felt dynamic is there, then you move to number 777, which is the number of the magician that can create worlds. This is the number of probability manipulation. Because the number 7, the symbol is the sword and the plow. It's the number, you know, as I said before, the bull pulls the plow and plows the earth for seeds to be planted. In order for you to essentially create something, manifest something, once you have these energetics up to 666 supercharged and stabilized, your intention basically needs to discern possibilities. You say, I want this as opposed to that. I don't want that, and I want this. I want my energy to flow in this direction, to plow a course, to plant my seeds, and for there to be a purposeful isolation of probabilities, not all of these, this. That is the number 7. That is the meaning of the sword. The sword in occultism doesn't stab people and kill them. The sword basically cuts out and separates. It distinguishes. It might as well be the pencil or the paintbrush. You know, it essentially marks, and it doesn't. It's not a separation in terms of you know, the boundary itself. That's the number 8. That represents how to take what you've chosen and create new possibilities that are unprecedented, that essentially you have to pull out from where nothing has been created yet. That's the number 8. That's why it's the Christ number. The whole representation of Christ consciousness is going beyond magical manipulation, is taking the existing energy and forging something new from it. Mystical creation is going into the void and creating something that has never been here before. So the difference between Simon the Magus and Jesus Christ, for example, if you want to take it like that, is that Simon must use resources at hand. The Illuminati must use what they've got. They can't create a new possibility. They can't define a new timeline. They can only try to forge a new timeline out of all the pain and suffering from this one. Grab it and try to build it and use it to define something and try to push it and pretend they're Jesus Christ or the 888. You don't see the number 888 in their symbolism. You see them stop at 777. And the ancient world stopped at the scale of 7, you know, because it is the cycle where the common man, the number 7 represents a spectrum of current level experience. Basically, in psychology, I read that you can only discern 7 items without creating new categories. You know, that's the way the mind works. So if you have 7 of something, you can work with that and build upon that. You have to create a new octave, a new spiral, a new level. And this is what the establishment cannot do, whether you talk about the, in my honest opinion, whether you're talking about the, you know, minions, the dragon whatevers, the upper echelons, the peak, the, you know, any level. If they could do that, they would have done it. They wouldn't be beating around the bush playing these games back and forth. That's what they want to do. They want to create a new spiral and define it. It's 8 o'clock right now, and define it on their terms. That is what they cannot do. And that's what all this back and forth, and that's why they're playing with us, you know. And they want to get our energy and our support because they don't know how to do this. And unless they face the number 6 and the karma that has been messing with the number 6, because the number 6 is not meant to be thrown out or demonized. The number 6 is meant to be redeemed. This is where the spike is. This is where the wound is. This is where the stigmata have been. This is, if you can have, think about it this way. Take the nails out of Jesus' hands, and there's a third one down at the feet, right? Imagine a number 6 on each of these. That is the 666. It is the 6 on the arm or here with the nail, because the nail is the letter Vav, which was represented by a number 6. That is the mystical significance. The next one was here, and the other one was down at the feet. There are 3 6s on Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ has been crucified by the number of the beast. And thus being resurrected is not an escape. It's transforming the number of the beast. Jesus Christ was fucked. Basically, you might put it that way, because the phallus is what the 6 represents in Hebrew numerology. So in order to, but he didn't die. Even historically, there are ideas, well, you know, you leave him 3 hours up on the cross or even 6 hours, he's not going to die. He's going to be in shock. We can heal him, lock him up somewhere and heal him. And this could have happened. In any case, however, the Jesus Christ that was around was not a robust person according to the accounts. They could still see the stigmata, so the mark was still there. And at the same time, he was pale, you know, he didn't, don't touch me, don't come too close, leave me alone, you know. And, you know, some say that he left. He went to Kashmir and lived a long life and had children. But the fact is, he never interacted with a global or collective experience again. So the thing is, we don't have to worry about 777 because the Illuminati are in the same position, whatever. Illuminati is just a word. The establishment in an occult context, they want to be master magicians. They think they are. They think they are master magicians. They want to be avatars, Jesus Christs, but antichrists. That's what they want. So they want to master 888, so they don't speak much about it. So, you know, you often hear about 999 as an abstraction, but you don't hear too much about 888, which is the number of Christ consciousness and Christ application. The number 77 you hear about. 777, 777, just, excuse me, you hear about 333. So they are in their highest rank is the Master Magus. And the Master Magus is essentially an illusionist. So it's not even a real Magus. Why? Because they're also founded on the distortion of 666. If they've messed up with our karma, they can't pretend, you know, it's not like, okay, I'm going to force you to eat GMO while I eat organic, and we're going to be fine. Occultism doesn't work that way. If you fuck with the archetype, there's no way you're going to find a good version stashed away for yourself. It's going to be fucked for everybody. It's holographic. That's the way it works. If you want to redeem the archetype and be empowered for yourself, you're going to have to redeem it for everybody. It's holographic. It's in everywhere, in everything. That's how it works. You can't fool God, nature, existence, however one you call it. You can't cut corners like that. Because if you could, there would be no existence. They would have been cut sometime in the past, even from the get-go. Come on, there were far more magnanimous beings in the initial stages of creation from our perspective than us. So these idiots, you know, I don't care what or who they claim to be, and who cares who they are specifically, but it is good advice to go back to 555 to set a good foundation, and that's what mysticism does. It says, hey man, let's just go back to 111. Go back to 1, go to 0. And you can't understand 0, however, if you don't start at 1. So understanding the essence of existence, and maybe that's too abstract, but the number 5 happens to be where anybody can relate, because it represents our human experience of being alive consciously. From the number 5, you can actually reach to the earlier numbers and make sure that, you know, you're cool with those, and then you can extend to the number 6, which is what you're doing. You're doing 666, and it is no coincidence that Jesus Christ on the cross is the representation of 666. And you might say that this is what the beast is related to. When you are on the cross, screaming in agony, you become a beast. When the Emperor Nero, who tortured people, represented the abuse of power, and they said, well, that's the beast. Yes, think about it. When you're being tortured, where does your shadow go? You're denying your shadow, it becomes the beast. And it may seem like it's coming from the outside, but it is the full manifestation of your own pain projected outward. And you say, well, how can I'm just feeling pain. How can that turn into this monster? Well, multiply it by as many people as there are on the planet, you know, at least. And then multiply it by the pain that goes on in the animal world, in the plant kingdom, et cetera, you know. This is not something we can turn away from. It may seem overwhelming, however, we're fully equipped and fully designed. And one of these things is our ability to organize information, to organize feeling, to organize energy, not in an external way, but in a felt manner, and to be able to orchestrate our own creative process, just as you're doing in your relationship. It's what I wanted to say with people. It's, look, you know, this is not people who criticize the relationship or whatever. Yes, I have a problem with polyamory myself because people tend to not be honest in that. You have one person motivated to have a lot of partners, and all of these other partners are serving them. And, you know, there's a bunch of excuses going on within this dynamic that often occurs. Not always, but it can. People can get hurt. So if you're not mature enough, you better watch out when you're getting into this. And you also need to keep your empathy open. But in your case, it's different. because it's monogamous. I say your relationship is monogamous in a certain sense because you and her are not, well, with all of her other relationships, she's not having the same thing as she is with you. You're doing something different. It's not just a normal love relationship, and it's not just sex. It's not even tantrum. So she's not having that with anybody else. She's just having that with you. So in the sense of what you're really doing, you're being monogamous, you know. And you have to be, because we can't dilute our focus on these things until we're able to expand and deepen. That's the whole purpose of monogamy in the first place, to be able to deepen with somebody, at least have an experience of being able to focus on one person and go deep and be able to fully experience that. And then if you want to withdraw and move on or do whatever, that's fine. But now you're able to do that. So if you're going to do polygamy, you're not just going to be staying on the surface, and, you know, that might not be satisfied. No matter how many partners you have, you'll be preoccupied. You won't be satisfied, in my opinion, unless you can take it all deeper. I'm fully for polygamy or polyamory or whatever, as long as people fully enter the full volumetric dimension of their potential. I'd like to stop here because it's 808, and you mentioned we started at 717, and I'd like to stop on this note that the number 8 represents unrealized potential. This is not something that has come into our world yet, because we have 3 number values: the 666, the 555, and the 777. And in the 777, we're going to save the psychopaths from what the pit of hell they've gotten into by not being able to enter the 777 in the right way or the healthy way. And in doing so, we're healing the 666, but to heal the 666, we need to address the 555, because that balances our full humanity. Remember, the pentagram is actually a human being, whether he's standing on his head or not. So now at 809, I'd like to say thank you for listening to this. I'm sorry this may have been a rather complicated talk. A lot of information was shared, and there's a lot of food for thought. So please, I hope you have borne with me, and that you maintain a certain sense of patience and tolerance as you listen to this. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Aristo. Namaste.
Namaste.